Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Robert. Welcome, everybody, those of you here in the room at the CBI HQ, and those of you at home in your pajamas. We know you're wearing your pajamas, but it's our secret. It's a real pleasure, Robert, to collaborate with you and the brilliant Centre for Policy Studies on today's event. I don't know if you know the CPS logo, but it's basically a dartboard, because your thinking always hits the bullseye, right? Although I think it looks very much like the Jam logo, for those of you old enough to remember, which makes you the Paul Weller of modern conservative thought, which is a comparison you're not wild about, given Paul Weller's politics. But I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Anybody that follows topics like these will read Robert's brilliant column in the Sunday Times, as I do every week. Yes, today we do need to talk about growth. As you said, labor shortages, supply chain problems, energy prices soaring. More about that from the Chancellor in a moment. Inflation outstripping wages. That's why we need to talk about growth. This is 1 year after we fully left the European Union. And Brexit was a two-part plan. The first bit was supposed to be the easy bit, where we leave. And the second bit was all about growth. Higher growth, higher competitiveness than ever before, unleashing the hidden potential of Britain. And on that front, we really haven't got started yet. And look, I am a big believer in post-Brexit Britain. I think it gives us the burning platform we need to push the UK's huge economic potential. I think it gives us the freedoms to place our own bets. It gives us the opening to lead the world on modern regulation, and it can awaken us from the flatlining productivity that took hold after the financial crisis. But that is not where we are currently headed. Now, the government has a new talking point. You all will have heard it. We are the fastest growing economy in the G7. I mean, I get the spin, but I deeply hope that no one in government believes their own PR. Because, let's be honest, V-shaped recoveries around black swan events like pandemics are not a time for credit or blame, right? No one is to blame for the nosedive, nor are they in credit for the bounce back. We do, however, as Robert cited, get a dose of reality from the independent OBR. And their forecast is their judgment on the UK's economic trajectory. And as Robert says, once the rebound's complete, we fall to growth of 1.3%, rising to 1.7%. And given, as Robert mentioned, that our trend growth previously had been closer to 2 and 2.5, this is not good enough. What's truly worrying for me is that, on the face of it, government seems to have accepted this forecast as the only target, the trajectory as the potential. And everything the government is doing is trying to get growing. When scored by the OBR, essentially it just achieves a new normal of low growth. We have lowballed the UK. It's in our numbers, it's in our plans, but at the CBI, we think we can do a lot better. Of course, this becomes political very quickly, and as we saw yesterday at PMQs, every party is the party of growth now. Well, we don't do politics at the CBI. Robert will be better at that when we get talking. But I know the government really cares about growth, but there are contrasting conservative principles at play. This is a party that believes in low taxes, but also fiscal discipline. It's a party that believes in low regulation, and yet it also believes that social goals can trump that. It regulates against unhealthy foods. It keeps gas prices artificially low. Even on Brexit, we have tolerated an unbelievable increase in regulation in the short run in the interests of sovereignty, with the hope of changing that later. Now, ultimately, only politicians, not me, not us, can decide the right blend of taxes, spending, and borrowing, and only politicians can decide the right mix of regulations. But what I will say is that the current settlement isn't working. There are rising spending pressures, too much tax, and too little growth. As a great hero of mine once sang, we are caught in a trap. Let me be clear about why this is such a problem. Today's high spending, high taxes, low growth is a cycle that's very hard to get out of. Cutting spending is far from straightforward, which is, by the way, why no political party wants to do it. By the end of 2021, a record 6 million people in England were waiting for routine hospital appointments, and the IFS warns the backlog could hit 10 million as appointments that were deferred during the pandemic resurface. And there are backlogs in the courts, and there are school pupils behind on learning, and transport funding models really being squeezed. In addition, meeting the needs of an aging population in the years ahead will put even more pressure on the public purse. By our calculations, by 2030, we may need to find an additional 40 to 50 billion a year to cover the cost of an aging society. So how do we pay for that? Well, the Treasury are naturally turning to taxation. But can we really raise taxes further? The UK tax burden is set to be the highest sustained level in peacetime. On corporation tax, analysis by Robert's colleagues and the Tax Foundation shows that we're currently the 11th most competitive in OECD, mostly thanks to the super deduction. But when that ends, we will slip down to 31st place on corporation tax. And of course, the government likes to say, well, we're still very competitive on business tax by looking at the corporation tax rate. It should accept, in honesty, that that's comparing apples and pears. It doesn't include, for example, the UK's eye-watering property taxes, which are the 4th highest in the OECD. We know the evidence that raising taxes reduces growth, and cutting them drives it. After all, we cut VAT to stimulate consumption. We remove road tax to stimulate the buying of electric vehicles. And of course, Robert, you and your Conservative colleagues are deep believers in lowering taxes to stimulate economic growth. Now, let's be honest, the government are in a tough spot in all of this. They say we simply can't afford to spend the things we want to spend on growth. But I say we can't afford not to. Because simply put, we will not pay down today's debt, extend public services, and lower taxes on 1.6% growth. It's not going to happen. To be clear, we're not talking about growth by any means. We are talking about the right kind of growth, sustainable long-term growth based on investment, innovation, and productivity. Now, it has been the Treasury's job as an institution since the Stone Age to be skeptics of this kind of talk. But economic and fiscal policy are not the same thing. No CEO in this room puts the finance department in charge of sales or lets them alone determine strategy. Companies can't afford not to invest in growth, and nor can countries. It's also not just about money. It's about ambition, imagination, and above all, it's about the political confidence to replace incremental policy with bolder and better. So can we do it? Can we pull this off, what I describe? Well, I'll give you 3 reasons to believe that we can. The first is, as Robert said, we've done it before. Between 1993 and 2008, the UK market sector grew by 3% a year, twice the rate of the last decade. And it wasn't, as some say, about unsustainable bubbles in sectors like oil and property and FS. 3/4 of this growth in our work was driven by capital investment, new technologies and innovation, double what they contributed in the last decade. Second reason to believe, look at other countries who've done it. I will name one with a hint of menace, Singapore. Reduced operating costs, cut corporate tax by 10%, made big bets to spark investment, spent on infrastructure, venture capital services, low interest loans, and tax incentives. The result was an average of nearly 6% growth per year. Imagine that on the Thames. And these are the kinds of policies now being deployed today by EU countries as part of the COVID Recovery Fund. Look, the third reason to believe we can do it, and this for me is the most important, is that in the UK we have never, in my lifetime, had quite a moment like this, when the triple forces of the pandemic, Brexit, and the race to net zero coalesce to create a burning platform and opportunity for growth. During the pandemic, this country emerged as a global leader in life sciences. We saw 3/4 of firms adopt new technologies. We saw 700,000 new businesses alone in 2020. In the wake of Brexit, we have new regulatory and tax freedoms, and we can make trade deals on our own terms. But the greatest prize of all flows from our world-leading position on decarbonisation. As Mark Carney announced at COP26, there is a wall of investment to fund decarbonisation, over $130 trillion of assets. and a big chunk of that is in London. And this isn't about woke, it's about wealth. And British businesses are begging conservative politicians to see the enormous prizes available for companies and countries that move fast. So all this means this is our moment. In my last job at Be The Business, working on UK productivity, I started to get down. I became a doubter. I thought, God, is low productivity, low growth, low investment, is that endemic in UK economic life? What I felt at the time was somehow we needed a shock. We needed some jump leads. Well, we now have 3. Brexit, COVID, net zero. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change the trajectory of the British economy. Every CEO I speak to says it. It's also why I took this job. So, what do we do about it? Well, the government does have a plan today, but it's a plan only for 1.6%. It's a plan that increases business taxes massively without the release for investment following suit. It's a plan that funds green investment more than the pass, but less than our international competitors. It's a plan that funds an inflexible apprenticeship levy program while skill shortages continue to hinder growth. It's a plan that stops immigration for the skills we need, but offers no alternative to get them here. Now, there are plenty of exceptions to this rule, moments where this government really has made bold interventions in pursuit of better growth. The super deduction was a super exception to normal incremental thinking. It was the boldness we need. Now, the 2023 end date is too soon for most investment cycles. So not only does it need extending, it needs to represent a totally new way of thinking about business investment. The offshore wind market, with its contracts for difference, was the moment the UK government realised that it's not just about public expenditure. They could use their balance sheet to unlock high-growth private sector markets. The adoption in the budget in October of skills boot camps was the government realising how the world of skills really operates in business today. All these measures have one thing in common. They overcame orthodoxy in public policy, they represented bolder thinking, and that is what we need across government now. We need every cabinet minister, and especially the Prime Minister, leading a campaign for bolder growth. So we have some ideas on how to get them started. 5 new ideas. First, we think we should use this moment to transform private sector investment. So how about we leverage the 6-point corporation tax increase shock of next April to stimulate unprecedented business investment and innovation? Any salesperson know, any salespeople in the room? Any salesperson know that a price rise is a great time to do a discount. So when the super deduction ends in March 23, let's replace it with a permanent investment deduction, a 100% tax deduction for capital spending. That way, companies can straight away see the value of their investments in a lower tax bill. I want to see Rishi outside a car dealership speaking to camera saying, you can pay loads more tax if you want to, but why not invest more, pay less, grow your business, and serve your country? What are the chances of him doing that? 2, let's talk about skills. We have a new idea for new times. We totally get why the apprenticeship levy was introduced. Apprenticeships were the only options for technical skills. But today's reality is we have T-levels and higher technical qualifications and boot camps on top of apprenticeships. The government then was worried that UK businesses were spending too little on talent, or that the training was poor quality, or that we choose instead just to import the skills we needed. Well, I agree with all that, but it's ancient history now. Today, at every level, in every sector, and in every part of the country, firms are facing acute skills shortages. And the government is saying, we can't import them. We have to grow them overnight. Skills policy just isn't set up to deliver what we need, partly because the situation has changed so drastically. What employers need are rapid-fire, high-quality skills right now. And so do employees. So let's stop solving a 2010 problem. Let's start solving a 2030 problem. We need more money from firms, yes. Funding more British worker skills, yes, with a higher quality and more flexible offer. It's time to turn the apprenticeship levy into a skills challenge fund. We would allow businesses to buy training modules with their levy funds, not just full apprenticeship qualifications. We would allow greater flexibility on the types of training, and we'd incentivize and reward firms that go the extra mile to train their people, with an upside kicker for those businesses that spend more than just their levy. And if we have that in place, I will join any government minister marching around the country, urging businesses to invest more in their people. Third, we must go for green growth. And we must accelerate the plans, and the green, especially in the green markets, the green private sector markets, where Britain today leads the world, but may not for long. Three things the government must do now. One is to close the investment gap, in particular in those important green growth areas. Energy efficiency, for example, where we need an extra $3 billion a year to properly retrofit our homes and businesses and bring down everybody's energy bills, not just today, for 6 weeks' time, but for good. By the budget, we must publish the target business model, contract for difference, in hydrogen. We've been waiting now for ages. We need to show the world that this is the place where they want to put their money to work in hydrogen. And thirdly, we should launch a scorecard for green competitiveness, to launch by government and business together, to hold ourselves accountable versus our competitor countries about how we're doing in the major green growth markets of the future. Fourth, and I hope you like this one, Robert, we need to take up the Brexit opportunity we now have on regulation. Contrary to popular opinion, we don't want a bonfire of regulations for business or divergence for the sake of it. This is about something altogether smarter. It's about leading the world in having the most future-focused regulatory environment. It's a vision where Britain, therefore, is the first to win in new and growing markets, AI, life sciences, and so on, and also the first to adapt in existing ones, transforming the UK into a global regulation rule setter. So today, we propose that the Prime Minister builds on his very good thinking in Monday's Brexit paper on regulation and sets up a new Office for Future Regulation. Now, I realize that doesn't sound that radical, but its mission would be. The focus of the new body would be specifically on the big bets we need to make in our economy. Regulation would be future-focused on new technology and new consumer realities. It would be more agile, changing when out of date, allowed to do so now that we don't have to negotiate it between 28 countries. It would be more proportionate, rooted in a better balance between investment and consumer protection. And finally, it would be more dynamic, and our regulators more dynamic, allowing them to be quick and decisive, just as we saw with the vaccine, when the MHRA enabled the UK to lead the world. Fifth and finally, let's get serious about having the workforce for the future. Last autumn, you may remember, business and government had a pointless quarrel over HGV drivers and butchers. The government ignored the obvious evidence that the UK couldn't train enough new ones in time at home. They said, tough luck, unless we close the borders, business will never change. Great rhetoric, poor results. So shall we get serious now about how we can generate more of the skills we need at home, so we can rely less on immigration? Nadim Zahawi, the Education Secretary, is on to something with his new Unit for Future Skills, designed to look at the data of the skills gaps in different industries. But let's go one step further. Let's supercharge that idea and build an independent council for future skills. What would it do? It would take a holistic look at our workforce needs for today and tomorrow, number one. Number two, work out how government policies can help us meet them. Number three, it would optimize, therefore, government training provision towards that future economic demand. And number four, it would give independent recommendations on where we'll need visas to overcome shortages in homegrown talent. It would therefore set the shortage occupation list whilst thinking about homegrown skills at the same time. It sounds impossible. How could the Home Office and the DFE collaborate? But it's now so obvious. And businesses can't take the government's immigration policy seriously until it shows a real plan for homegrown skills. So to finish, 5 ideas about how to think seriously about growth. That's just in one speech. Imagine if the CPS and all the other think tanks and our leading academics and our finest entrepreneurs were all invited by the Prime Minister to join a new campaign, Bolder Ideas for a Faster Growing Britain. Don't get me wrong, it's not all on government. This is a speech deliberately addressed to a political audience, but the CBI in the year ahead will be using every week, every month to promote serious growth to businesses across the country. We will ask them to increase investment in net zero, in innovation, in digital transformation, in exports, in skills, in the health and well-being of their workforce. And we will gather them in clusters around the country to deliver levelling up the only way it can be done, with the private sector creating better skills, jobs, and wages. But to government I say, in closing, now is not a time to lowball our ambitions, to settle for a new normal of low growth. Better growth is the only real answer to the cost of living crisis, rising energy prices, high inflation. Better growth ensures that we as a country are not imprisoned in a cycle where we can't afford what we need and we can't raise taxes further to pay for it. Better growth ensures that every region, every nation, every corner of society can flourish, that a decade of low wages for many is not repeated, and that inequalities across the UK are reduced, not increased. So let's refuse to settle for policy convention. The best prime ministers and the best governments haven't. They have been radical reformers. I believe that UK business leaders have never been more serious about growth. After 6 years of reasons to wait, they are a coiled spring ready to pounce. We just need politicians to join us in making it so. After a disappointing economic decade past, this is our second chance. So let history show that we seized the moment. Thank you.